The thing about pride is that it makes you say things you can't take back. I'm Allison Hicks, 34 years old, and I've spent the last 2 months replaying a conversation that lasted maybe 10 minutes, but managed to destroy something I thought was permanent. It started with a dead phone battery and ended with the kind of silence that echoes. Garrett and I met at a community art center in 2019. I was there teaching weekend watercolor classes to supplement my income as a freelance marketing consultant, and he was taking pottery lessons on Saturday mornings. He had these patient hands and this way of concentrating that made the chaos in the studio seem to quiet around him. When his first mug came out lopsided, he laughed so hard that half the class started laughing too. We started dating that fall, right before the world turned upside down. While everyone else was struggling through lockdowns and uncertainty, we found this unexpected rhythm together. Garrett worked as a paramedic, essential worker, always calm under pressure, the kind of person you'd want beside you in a crisis. His schedule was unpredictable, but he never complained. Just adapted, shifted, made things work. I was building my consulting business from my apartment, landing bigger clients, slowly establishing myself in the competitive world of brand strategy. My income fluctuated wildly those first couple years, but Garrett never made me feel unstable about it. When I stressed about a client deadline, he'd show up with takeout from my favorite Vietnamese place and set up a workspace for me at his kitchen table so I could work while he made dinner. We weren't the dramatic Instagram perfect couple. We were steady, reliable. We played board games on Wednesday nights, split grocery bills, and talked about everything from his difficult shifts at the hospital to my frustrations with clients who wanted champagne marketing on a beer budget. By last year, I was finally hitting my stride professionally. I'd landed 3 major accounts, hired a part-time assistant, and could afford to move out of my cramped apartment into a decent 1-bedroom with a real office space. For the first time in years, I felt financially secure. That's when the little differences between us started feeling bigger. Last spring, we got invited to 4 weddings. 4. Between my college friends and his cousins, it felt like every weekend was another celebration of other people's happiness. Don't get me wrong, I love weddings. But there's something about being 34 and watching everyone around you make these grand romantic gestures that makes you evaluate your own relationship. At the first wedding, Garrett wore his one good suit, navy blue, perfectly fine, but clearly from several years ago. His tie was a little short, his shoes were scuffed, and when I suggested we go shopping beforehand, he said his suit was perfectly adequate, which it was, technically. But standing next to couples where the men had clearly invested in their appearance, I found myself noticing the difference. The second wedding was worse. The groom gave this incredible speech about how his wife had inspired him to become a better version of himself, how she'd encouraged him to leave his dead-end job and pursue his dream of opening a restaurant. The whole room was crying. Later, when I mentioned how romantic it was, Garrett said, "That's nice, but some of us are already doing work we believe in." He wasn't wrong. Garrett loved being a paramedic, was genuinely proud of the lives he saved, the difference he made, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd misunderstood my point entirely. By the 3rd wedding, I was hyper-aware of comparisons. The bride's boyfriend turned fiancé had surprised her with a trip to Italy when he proposed. Another couple had bought their first house together and kept showing everyone pictures of their renovations. Meanwhile, Garrett and I were still splitting the cost of dinner and had never seriously discussed moving in together, let alone marriage or buying property. After that 3rd wedding, I brought up the future during our drive home. "Do you ever think about where we're headed?" I asked. Garrett glanced over at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've been together 4 years. Most couples have made some bigger commitments by now." He was quiet for a long moment. "Are you asking if I want to move in together?" "I'm asking if you want more. A life together. Marriage, maybe. Shared goals." Another pause. I thought we already had a life together. "You know what I mean." "Actually, I'm not sure I do. Are you unhappy with how things are?" The question caught me off guard because I wasn't unhappy exactly, but I was restless. I just wonder sometimes if we're both playing it too safe. Garrett pulled into my apartment complex and turned off the engine. Allison, I respond to car accidents and overdoses and heart attacks every day. My idea of safe might be different from yours. I knew he was right, but it still felt like he was missing something important. 2 weeks after that conversation, Garrett got offered a promotion to shift supervisor. More money, better hours, additional responsibilities. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that should have been cause for celebration. Instead, he turned it down. I like the work I'm doing now, he explained when he told me. Supervision means more paperwork, fewer patient interactions. I didn't become a paramedic to sit behind a desk. I tried to be supportive, but I was honestly baffled. The promotion would have meant a 20% salary increase and regular weekday hours instead of the rotating shifts that made planning anything difficult. Who turns down better money and stability? You could always go back to patient care later, I suggested. But the experience in management could open other doors. What doors do I need opened? He asked. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. And there it was, the fundamental difference between us. I was always thinking about the next level, the next opportunity, the strategic value of every decision. Garrett was content with the present moment, satisfied with work that felt meaningful even if it wasn't ambitious. Neither approach was wrong, but they were increasingly incompatible. The breaking point came in September. I got a call from a former client who'd moved to Charlotte and was launching a new venture capital firm. She wanted me to head up their marketing and brand development, a full-time position with equity, excellent benefits, and a salary that was double what I was making freelancing. The catch? I'd need to relocate within 6 weeks. I was terrified and exhilarated. This was the opportunity I'd been working toward for years, the chance to step into a leadership role with a company that was positioned to grow exponentially. But it meant leaving everything I'd built here, including Garrett. When I told him about the offer, his first response was, "Congratulations, that sounds incredible." His second response was, "When do you leave?" Not we. You. I studied his face, looking for some indication that he was thinking about our relationship, about what this meant for us. But he looked resigned, almost like he'd been expecting this conversation. "I haven't accepted yet," I said. "I wanted to talk to you first." "There's nothing to talk about," he said. "You should take it." Just like that, Garrett sat down heavily in his chair. "Allison, this is your dream job. I'm not going to be the reason you don't pursue it. But what about us? What about us?" he asked. And there was something in his tone I'd never heard before. Not anger, but something closer to exhaustion. "You want different things than I do. You always have." The conversation that followed was one of those relationship discussions where you're both trying to be mature and reasonable, but you're actually just circling around the fundamental incompatibility you've both been avoiding. I suggested long distance, at least temporarily. He pointed out that my new position would require 60-hour weeks and frequent travel, while his work schedule was already unpredictable. I suggested he could find a paramedic job in Charlotte. He reminded me that he'd just turned down a promotion because he was happy with his current situation. We talked in circles for 2 hours without reaching any resolution, except the growing certainty that we wanted different lives. The next day, I was supposed to have lunch with my friend Rachel to celebrate her recent engagement. Instead, I found myself sitting in my car outside the restaurant, too emotionally drained to go inside. I texted her to cancel, but she called immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You sound terrible." I ended up telling her everything, the job offer, the conversation with Garrett, my confusion about what to do next. Rachel listened patiently, then said what I probably needed to hear but didn't want to. "Han, maybe this is a blessing in disguise. You and Garrett are great together, but you're not growing in the same direction." "That doesn't mean we can't make it work," I protested. "Can you though? Really? When's the last time he challenged you to be better? When's the last time you felt like he was keeping up with your ambitions?" The question stung because I couldn't answer them easily. "He's a good guy," Rachel continued. "But you need someone who matches your energy, someone who's going to push you forward instead of being content with where you are." Later that evening, still processing my conversation with Rachel, I texted her, "You're probably right about Garrett and me being mismatched. I think I'm out of his league at this point and it's starting to show." Her response was immediate. "I've been thinking that for a while but didn't want to say it. You've outgrown the relationship." I texted back, "Exactly. It's nobody's fault, but I need someone who can keep up with me professionally and personally. Someone with bigger dreams." At the time, it felt like an honest assessment of our situation. I wasn't trying to be cruel or dismissive, just realistic about our different trajectories. 3 days later, I was at Garrett's apartment helping him troubleshoot a problem with his laptop. He'd been trying to update his resume for hours, frustrated with the formatting, and I'd offered to help since I dealt with design software regularly. While I was working on his laptop, my phone died. Without thinking, I asked if I could borrow his phone to call my assistant about a client meeting the next day. "Sure," he said, handing it over. "Password is your birthday." I smiled at that. Even now, his phone password was my birthday. As I dialed my assistant's number, a text notification popped up on his screen. It was from Rachel, responding to something in a group chat I wasn't part of. But what caught my eye wasn't Rachel's new message. It was the preview of an earlier conversation between her and Garrett that I hadn't known existed. The preview showed just enough to make my heart sink. What Allison said about being out of your league. My call went to voicemail, but I barely noticed. With shaking fingers, I scrolled up to see the full conversation. Rachel had screenshot my texts about Garrett and sent them to him with a message. "Thought you should see this. I'm sorry. She asked me not to say anything, but you deserve to know how she really feels." I stared at the screen, reading my own words reflected back at me. "I think I'm out of his league at this point. I need someone who can keep up with me professionally and personally. Someone with bigger dreams." The timestamp showed Rachel had sent the screenshots 2 days ago, which meant Garrett had known for 2 days what I really thought about our relationship, which meant our entire conversation about the Charlotte job, his resignation to my leaving, his quiet acceptance of our incompatibility. All of it had happened after he had seen my texts calling him inadequate. I heard Garrett's footsteps coming back from the kitchen. Panicking, I quickly closed the message thread and pretended to be focused on his resume. "Everything okay?" he asked. Noticing my expression, I looked at him, really looked at him. He seemed tired, maybe sad, but not angry. If anything, he looked like someone who'd had a question answered that he'd been afraid to ask. "Fine," I managed. "Just trouble reaching my assistant." He nodded and sat down beside me. We worked in silence for another 20 minutes, fixing his resume, discussing font choices, and bullet point formatting like we were any normal couple helping each other with everyday tasks. But nothing was normal. Every casual comment felt loaded. When he thanked me for helping, I wondered if he was really saying goodbye. When he offered to make coffee, I wondered if he was just being polite to the woman who'd humiliated him behind his back. The worst part was that he was still being kind to me, still patient, still himself. Even knowing what I'd said about him, he hadn't lashed out or made me feel terrible. He'd just absorbed it quietly, the way he absorbed everything else. I left his apartment that evening without saying anything about the texts. I told myself I needed time to think, to figure out how to explain or apologize. But honestly, I was also hoping he'd bring it up first so I wouldn't have to admit I'd seen his messages. He didn't. For a week, we maintained this strange charade of normalcy. He called to check in about my Charlotte decision. I updated him on client projects. We made plans to go to a movie the following weekend. But something fundamental had shifted. There was a carefulness in our interactions that hadn't been there before. Like we were both handling something fragile that might break if we moved too quickly. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I called him on a Wednesday night and said we needed to talk. "I know you saw the text between Rachel and me," I said, without preamble. There was a long pause. "Okay. I need you to understand that I was upset and venting. Those weren't my real feelings about you." Another pause. "Weren't they?" The question was so quiet I almost missed it. "What do you mean? I mean, Were you lying to Rachel, or are you lying to me now? I didn't know how to answer that, because there had been truth in what I'd told Rachel, even if it wasn't the whole truth. It's more complicated than that, I said finally. Is it? Garrett asked. Because it seemed pretty straightforward to me. You think you've outgrown our relationship. You think I'm holding you back from someone better. That's not Allison, he interrupted, and his voice was still gentle but firm. I've been thinking about this for a week. And the thing is, you might not be wrong. That stopped me cold. What? Maybe you're out of my league. Maybe you do need someone with bigger dreams. I've been asking myself why that makes me angry, and I realized it doesn't make me angry. It makes me sad. I felt tears starting. Garrett, I'm sad because I thought what we had was enough. I thought being happy with someone, being kind to each other, supporting each other, I thought that was the point. But apparently it's not enough for you, and maybe it shouldn't be. You are enough, I said, meaning it. I was just scared about the job, about the future, about making the wrong choice. I said things I didn't mean. But you did mean them, he said quietly. At least partly, and that's okay. People want different things. It doesn't make either of us bad people. We met for coffee the next day to finish the conversation in person. Garrett looked like he hadn't slept much, but he clearly thought through what he wanted to say. I've decided you should take the Charlotte job, he said. And I've decided we should end things cleanly instead of trying to make long-distance work. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. I love you, Allison. I have for years, but I love the version of you that exists with me, in this life we've built together. I don't think I love the version of you that needs constant growth and challenge and advancement to be happy. And that's the version you're becoming. That's not fair, I said. Maybe not, but it's honest. He reached across the table and took my hand. You want a partner who's going to push you to be better, who's going to match your ambition, who's going to grow with you professionally. I want a partner who's content with a good life, well-lived, who finds meaning in small moments and doesn't need everything to be a stepping stone to something bigger. I squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of what he was saying even as it broke my heart. Neither of those wants is wrong, he continued. But they're not compatible long-term, and pretending they are isn't fair to either of us. We talked for another hour, working through logistics, trying to end things with grace. He didn't make me feel guilty about the text to Rachel, didn't make me apologize for wanting more than what we had. In typical Garrett fashion, he was more concerned with making sure I felt okay about my decision than with nursing his own hurt. Which somehow made it worse. I took the Charlotte job. The work is everything I hoped it would be. Challenging, rewarding, constantly evolving. I'm good at it, maybe even great at it. I've made new friends, joined a book club, started dating someone who works in tech, and shares my enthusiasm for ambitious goals. But I think about Garrett constantly, not in a pining, regretful way exactly. More like a persistent awareness that I lost something irreplaceable. I'll be having a perfectly good day, feeling accomplished and happy, and then I'll see something that reminds me of him. A news story about first responders, someone laughing the way he used to laugh, and I'll feel this hollow ache. I found out through mutual friends that he's doing well, still working as a paramedic, still happy with his choice to stay in his current role. He's been dating someone, a nurse from his hospital. They sound well matched, content with the same kind of life that I found insufficient. I'm genuinely glad he's happy, but I also can't shake the feeling that I made a terrible mistake. The hardest part isn't missing Garrett, though I do. The hardest part is realizing that my texts to Rachel weren't entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. I was out of Garrett's league in some ways. More ambitious, more focused on external achievement, more willing to take risks for professional advancement. But he was out of my league in others. He was kinder, more patient, more content with the present moment. He had a capacity for quiet happiness that I envied but never learned to appreciate. The relationship we had was good. Not perfect, not Instagram-worthy, not the kind of partnership that inspires romantic comedies. but it was steady and genuine and full of small kindnesses that I didn't value properly until they were gone. I needed someone who would challenge me professionally, and I found that in Charlotte. But I also needed someone who would love me unconditionally, who would be my soft place to land after difficult days, who would make me laugh when I was taking myself too seriously. I had that with Garrett, and I gave it up because I thought I could do better. Maybe I could have. Maybe there's someone out there who would have been both things, the ambitious partner who matches my energy, and the gentle soul who grounds me when I need grounding. But probably not. Most people, most relationships, require choices about what you value most. I chose ambition over contentment, growth over stability, potential over presence. Those aren't wrong choices, but they weren't the only choices. And I'm slowly learning to live with the consequences of the path I picked. I saw Garrett last month when I was back in town for a wedding. He was there with his girlfriend, the nurse, and they looked happy together in a way that was both painful and reassuring to see. When we spoke briefly, he was warm but distant, the way you are with someone you used to know well but have moved beyond. I didn't apologize for the text. By then, it seemed beside the point, but I did tell him I was glad he was happy, and I meant it. Later, driving back to my hotel, I found myself thinking about those texts again. Not the cruelty of sending them, or the betrayal of Rachel sharing them, but the fundamental question they raised. What does it mean to be in someone's league? I'd measured our compatibility by ambition, by professional trajectory, by willingness to take risks for advancement. But Garrett had been measuring it by kindness, by contentment, by ability to find joy in everyday moments. Neither metric was more valid than the other, but they led to completely different conclusions about our relationship. The truth is, we were both out of each other's leagues in different ways. I couldn't match his capacity for presence and peace. He couldn't match my drive for growth and achievement. Instead of finding a way to appreciate those differences, we let them become incompatibilities. I'm successful now in ways I dreamed about 5 years ago. My work is meaningful. My income is substantial. My life is full of opportunities and challenges. But I've also learned that success without someone to share it with feels incomplete in ways I didn't anticipate. I don't regret taking the Charlotte job. It was the right choice for my career, probably for my life. But I do regret how I ended things with Garrett. The casual cruelty of those texts. The way I dismissed something good because it wasn't perfect. If I could go back, I wouldn't change my decision to move, but I would change how I talked about it, how I thought about it, how I valued what we had while we had it. Some things are worth more than we realize until they're gone. Some people are worth more than we realize until we've let them go. Garrett was never out of my league. I was just playing a different game than he was, measuring success by different rules. And by the time I realized we might have been better off learning each other's games instead of insisting on our own, it was too late to suggest a rematch. That's the thing about pride and ambition and the relentless pursuit of something better. Sometimes they cost you something that was already good enough. Sometimes they cost you something that was actually quite rare. Sometimes they cost you the very thing you didn't know you needed most.